My name is Dr. Andrea Voynitsky. I am not going to go through my self-introduction. By the way, if you have a question about self-introductions, I am absolutely happy to answer it. If you want to learn more about me, there are really two sources. One is my LinkedIn profile. I'm Andrea Wojnicki, just like the name on my Zoom box here. Or you can learn more about me if you go to talkabouttalk.com. Okay. So I also have no slides. So some of you I know have been to previous LinkedIn Live events where I'm teaching things about communication skills, about confidence, about personal branding and establishing your professional identity. I have absolutely no slides and I have absolutely no agenda. I'll tell you what I do have. I have 2 pages of questions, one here and one here, that people DM'd me on LinkedIn. If we have time, I will answer those. But the people that are here get first dibs. So please use the chat actively. Keep yourself on mute unless we're actually having unless I'm actually speaking to you directly. Please keep yourself on mute. And I'm going to try and get through everyone's questions. So like starting right now, just start firing your questions into the chat. And if we have a lull, like I said, I have actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions here, which is a lot to get through in an hour. They're fantastic questions. So thank you to those who shared them in advance. Before we get into that, I am going to share a little poll with you. Can you see that? Can I get a head nod if you see it? Okay. So the question is, can everyone see it? I can't tell if people are reading. Hi, Tom. Nice to see you. So which communication skill will help you most at work? So my question is, if you were to have basically a private coaching session with me, in other words, would you want to focus on formal presentation skills, networking, either in person or on LinkedIn, confidence and overcoming imposter syndrome, communicating with difficult people, establishing your professional identity or your brand, identifying your unique superpower, or maybe something else? And you can vote more than once. So if there's maybe 1 or 2 or at most 3 of those things that you're really interested in, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to answer that. I'm a little surprised.
Sorry, I don't understand the second one. Untitled question. If there's choice 1, choice 2.
That shouldn't be there.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
I pre-populated this and I think it automatically gave me 2 questions. I should have deleted that. Okay, did everybody vote? Has anybody not voted? Everyone's okay. So the first thing we'll talk about is, unless someone has a question in the chat, communicating with difficult people, and then we'll get into confidence. It looks like people are interested in the other topics as well. So thank you for that. Do we have any questions? You know, since there's just a few of us here, if you want to say it verbally, you're more than welcome to as well. Anyone have any questions they want to share? Otherwise, I'm going to get into, I guess, my thoughts on communicating with difficult people. Should I start there? Okay. So recently I've done some workshops with some physicians and executives in North America and actually around the world on communicating with difficult people. And I've actually learned some things by hearing about the scenarios that folks are going through. So the first thing that I want to start with is this. If you are dealing with someone difficult at work, I want you to first think about whether it's your issue to deal with or if somebody else should be dealing with the issue. So first of all, defining it. So if the person is chronically difficult, we're talking about this. It's not like you're entering into a high stakes situation and people are on edge, right? It's like someone who repeatedly is either making you look bad or arguing with you or cutting you off or interrupting you. So all of those types of things, right? So here's the first thing I want you to think about. Is it your issue to deal with or should someone else be dealing with it? And the answer to that is pretty simple. If you are junior in your career, which it looks like none of you are, then it is not your problem. You should be able to go to your boss and say, listen, this is what's going on. As you become more senior in your career, this is your issue to deal with, right? It's actually part of your job. So I was coaching one woman who recently became a partner at a well-known consulting and audit company that you've all heard of. And she said, until she got this promotion, everybody was happy, happy go lucky. And then suddenly this gentleman that was her peer suddenly started being incredibly competitive and talking down to her, interrupting her, making her look bad, disagreeing with her publicly in meetings and so on. And so I had to talk her down and say, listen, this is now part of your job. You're a partner. Nobody's going to be deflecting this from you. Okay. And so there are tactical things that you can do, but there's also a process that I suggest you go through. Let me share with you first some of the tactics. So when you're dealing with someone that's difficult and you're having a really difficult conversation, you really want to make sure that you're being careful about your vocabulary and you're not saying, and then, I mean, this is from, conflict communication research that they've done. You don't want to say you would say I. Right? Or you could even say we. If it's in a collaborative environment, maybe with other folks in the room, you want to encourage, the team environment, and you want to say we. What you really don't want to say is you. Like, you always interrupt me. You seem to be doing this. And like you see with my body language, I'm pointing my finger here. So it's just like a natural reaction when you say you. And this is like a big epiphany for people. Just don't allow yourself to say you. Shift the conversation. So someone interrupts you and you could say, I think we should make sure that we are allowing everyone around the table to have their words. So let's, go around one by one. And you're not saying you need to stop interrupting. That's just one example, right? So shift the language to I and we and away from you. That's a big one. In terms of the process, so I've had, and it's, by the way, this is the same process that I've coached some people through when people are constantly interrupting them. It's a sequence. So the first time it happens, you make a note of it. So you keep it personal, right? The second time it happens, I say, recognize it to the person, but in a casual way. You can even make a joke out of it. You could say, listen, I wasn't finished talking. Can you just let me talk? Or you make, whatever the context is, you kind of make light of it, but you acknowledge it. Okay. By the way, at any step along the way here, the person might stop being difficult or come and talk to you about it, and it might be resolved. The next step is to look the person in the eye, whether it's one-on-one or you're in a group, and say, listen, I've noticed, and then you have a track record, right? You go, like, I noticed this 2 weeks ago, you did it again last week, and now you just did it again. You need to stop interrupting me, or you need to stop whatever it is. So the third time you address it to the person, and you're not threatening them, but you're just like, let me finish my words, or I need to finish my thought, whatever the context is. So that's the next step in this kind of hierarchy or sequence. The next step would be bringing in an ally. So then if it repeats, and by the way, I was coaching a senior lawyer who told me this was happening. She was the only female on a senior team at a corporate law firm. And a couple of folks on the senior team were consistently trying to make her look bad and or interrupting her. So I coached her to go through the sequence. The fourth step in the sequence is to find an ally. So she pulled one of her more friendly colleagues aside and said, have you noticed this gentleman is constantly interrupting me and trying to make me look bad? And he said, no kidding. And she said, would you mind? And she told him, I've taken note. I've made light of it. I have explicitly asked him to stop. Now I'm asking for you to help. And he said, no problem. The next time I see it, whether you mention it or not, I'm going to step in. And actually for her, that was when it stopped. That's the next step. And then the fifth step is that you either go to HR or you go to your boss, or depending on the context, right? And the reason why it's really important to go through these steps is two things. One, usually you can resolve the situation by going through these kind of increasing in significant steps, right? The second reason that it's critical is that you don't want to be the person that goes to HR and then they have to coach you through how to deal with it. Because chances are they're going to ask you, when did you first take note of it? And you'll be like, well, let me tell you, I actually took notes. It was September 23rd or whatever. Did you say anything to the person? Yes, I did. On this date, I made light of it. On this date, I was very explicit about it. Has anyone else noticed the same situation? Yes. In fact, I had a conversation with so-and-so, right? So For those two reasons, that's really an effective way of dealing with difficult people. My hope is that you never have to go to HR. I know there's some HR execs here in this Zoom call. My hope is that you never have to go to HR with an issue like this. That, you know, and I guess the other test is if you've gone through all these steps and the person is adversely affecting your productivity, your ability to do your job, you actually have to go, you know, to HR or to your manager, depending on the context. The woman that I was coaching at the audit and consulting firm, she was going through these steps with this gentleman that was constantly trying to make her look bad. But the thing that really worked for her was this mind shift change that she did, which is she said to herself, and through my encouragement, like, this guy is part of my job. So she said he would literally like stick his head around the corner. Hey, Lisa, how's it going? And she said she used to be like, oh man, he's coming in here to make my life difficult. But since she and I had this conversation, I gave her this pep talk, you know, he's part of your job. She'd be like, hey, how's it going? Come on in. And she's like, in her mind, she's like, I've got this. This is one of the skills. This is one of the reasons I got promoted. I know exactly how to talk to this guy. I'm a partner now. I can deal with this. It's part of my job. Right. So, and when you are, you know, a partner or a vice president or a director, whatever the level is, you should be watching your junior folks for the same thing. Is there, and I remember when I was a junior brand manager at Kraft Foods and things started to get a little bit vicious, right? People would do exactly what I'm talking about. We'd go into a meeting, they'd make you look bad. Yeah. So watch out for your junior folks to make sure, because it is, if you are the senior leader, it is your job to make it easy for them to be productive and get their job done. Does anyone else have any specific questions about dealing with difficult people, even a specific scenario that they want to share? I think almost everybody voted for that one. Okay. There's no questions in the chat. I'm gonna start reading these questions that we got. Okay. So Maureen on LinkedIn said, what do I need to get noticed when I'm in an interview? I've been to a couple, but the biggest problem that I have is that I have been in senior roles and I can't convey that I want to work in other areas of HR, but I don't have to be a VP. Thanks. So I'm not, when I read this question, I'm going to answer this two ways. So she said, what do I need to do to get noticed for an interview? She wants to be invited to the interview, but then also when you're in the interview. And by the way, I recently released a podcast episode on interviewing skills, how to prepare for the interview, what to do during the interview, and what to do after the interview, plus how to answer questions. So if you are on the job market, I strongly recommend you listen to that episode. So I think her question is, how do you get invited to be in an interview? So there are a couple things that you can do. The word that I love here is discoverability. I see some head nods. So it's not that you are keyword stuffing your CV and your LinkedIn and the conversations that you're having with people, but you want to make sure you are as clear and focused as possible in terms of what your career goals are so that you are discoverable for those things. I was actually just talking to my agency about that, even for me being an executive communication coach, right? And so what words of what I do should be on my LinkedIn profile? And if I had a resume, it would be the same thing. So ask yourself, and I know a lot of people that are on the job market, they don't want to get too specific because they don't want to, be omitted from discussions that are kind of on the outside edge of what they're interested in. But if being as specific as you can be, so that when they're either doing a literal search or when they do happen to come by you, you'll be getting the check mark. And then the other thing is just with networking, you want to make sure that you are telling everyone, you're making it. The idea here is to make, through your networking, you want to be networking as much as possible. So you want to be talking to a quantity of people, but you want to be as focused as possible so that when, my goal is that you all, when you think executive communication coach, you think Andrea, right? I'm not a life coach. I'm not a career coach even. And I have to have this conversation with people sometimes. I'm not a career coach. I'm a communication coach. So if you can be as specific as possible in your conversations and in the words that you write about yourself, whether it's on your LinkedIn profile or wherever. And, you can actually reverse engineer this using plain language. What are people looking for who are going to find you for what you want to be found for? And then make sure those words are written on your CV, on your LinkedIn profile. So that's my answer to that. So the other part of her question is she wants to work in other areas of HR. Like right away, she should have like people management, human resources, talent management, like all of the synonyms that you can think of. They should be all over where she's promoting herself. Any other questions about that? I see some smiles and nods. Thank you. Okay. This
Sorry,
question
Andrea.
is,
I'm so
hey,
sorry.
Marcel.
It took me a second to find the unmute button, so sorry for the delay. I think this is related to this last question. To what extent, if there is a role, so I'm going to make an example. If there is a role where you kind of, let's say you meet 8 out of the 10 criteria, right? So you're a pretty good match, but there's a couple of areas where you don't meet the expectation. What's your sense in the interviewing process, or even when you send a cover letter, let's say, do you address that head on? Do you say, yeah, I don't have this, but guess what? I have these skills, which I think are pretty relevant or transferable. Or I'm going to say hide in question mark.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
just sort of talk around it?
Yeah. So, Marcel, my answer is not my first answer. I'm going to say to that is probably not going to be very satisfying. It's going to be, it depends, right?
Sure.
I'm a big fan of addressing the elephant in the room, but just not doing it first. Like that's kind of my default when I'm coaching folks on how to answer questions or how to position themselves for things, or even just generally positioning their professional identity or their personal brand. By the way, this female lawyer who I was coaching, who was the only woman, she ended up putting her hat in the ring for CEO, and she knew that she was the only woman, right? And so she's like, everyone's thinking that that's going to be my main message. I'm going to be talking about being the only woman. And I said, that's definitely not the thing you say first. You're going to wait a good 15 to 20 minutes before you say, oh, by the way, in my role here, in my identity of being the only woman, I just want to say that I'm going to take my experience of being a minority in this organization and in this industry, and I'm going to apply my learnings to make sure that everybody feels inclusive and not just across gender, right? So she had an answer for that, but she didn't lead with it. So I would say the same thing generally is my advice. If you've done the work on your personal brand, Marcel, you know what your key strengths are. So whenever you're going into a conversation, most interviewers have a list of questions that they have to go through, but they're making a general impression of you, a general judgment of you. So if you can hammer on what your strengths are, your relevant strengths, of course, it's not like they're looking for this and you're talking about these things over here, right? These are the things they're looking for, and you've got these ones nailed. You're going to hammer about how strong you are on those specific things. And by hammer, I should be a little bit more specific. You're going to talk about them, like how they show up for you, define them, and give examples. So have stories ready. I always say, like, identify 3, probably no more, main strengths of yours in terms of your professional identity, and then 2 or 3. 2's fine, by the way. I know I'm a big fan of the power of 3, but if you have 2 stories that illustrate each of your 3 main strengths, you'll be fine. You'll have lots to talk about. Maybe that's like the last page that you look at before you go into a job interview. In terms of, though, addressing your potential weaknesses or omissions in skill, like a skill deficit, I would first and foremost focus on your growth mindset, your focus on learning, your identity as a lifelong learner. And you could say, I want to just, you could say, I want to address the elephant in the room here. I feel like it's pretty clear that I get 4 out of the 5 check marks in this other one I have never done before. Like whatever it is, let's make it up. It's, dealing with the US. I've done all these things, but I've only done them in Canada. I've never done them in the US. You could say, listen, I am a very fast learner. And I also have a plan. Tell them about your plan. This is how I'm going to learn this. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. And they'll be like, that basically gets the check mark then, right?
Good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. I'm going to shift to one of the other questions that I did get some great questions, like I said. Any advice for generally boosting my confidence? This was a question that I got on LinkedIn from a woman who said she recognized that early in our careers, and this is true because she and I had this conversation, many of us suffer from not having the confidence to speak up And then later in our careers, it actually becomes, this is my observation, more and more senior folks come to me saying, I need you to help me with precision and brevity and clarity as opposed to speaking up, right? And she said, I'm kind of in a point in her career, she's mid-career. She said, I've always had an issue with speaking up. And when I do, I'm like, blah, I'm speaking for too long. It's lacking structure. And I said, well, that's a whole other conversation. And she said, I need a confidence boost. So let me tell you what I do when I need a confidence boost. And this is the first advice that I share with my clients who ask me to help them boost their confidence or overcome imposter syndrome. So the first thing that I would say is that, and this is what I do myself too, when I call it a shot of adrenaline. When I feel that shot of adrenaline, the first thing I say is in my mind, non-consciously, uh-oh. And I quickly do a 180 and I shift to, now I have the positive energy that I'm going to need to really shine. So explicitly relabel that shot of adrenaline, however it shows up for you, butterflies, feeling your temperature go up, make your face is turning red, whatever it is. When you feel that physical sensation, instead of thinking up downward spiral, instead shift it to a positive and tell yourself that it is the positive energy, the spark of energy that you need to shine in an interview, shine in a meeting, whatever it is. We've all been to, I think, conferences where there's a panel of folks on stage, there's 3 or 4 folks kind of leaning against the bar stools, and one of them kind of looks like they don't want to be there or they kind of don't care. And in my mind, I'm thinking, that's the guy who's not feeling the shot of adrenaline, which the rest of us are feeling, and he really would be better off feeling it. You don't want to be that person that you might come across as aloof or even overly confident. So instead of veering into that territory, just remind yourself that the energy, the adrenaline that you feel is a good thing. And yes, I still do this. And yes, I still feel it when I walk out on stage or when I press record or I open up a meeting like this. I feel a little bit of adrenaline and I remind myself it's a good thing. The second thing that I do is I slow down my breathing. And I know we've all heard this, like take slow, deep breaths. I've read some research and I've been actually coaching a lot of physicians recently, and I always check this with them and I get lots of head nods. Particularly slowing your exhale will tell your brain that everything's okay. Why? Because when we're nervous and anxious, we gasp for air. You don't want to be gasping for air. So you slow your exhale and then your brain says, everything must be okay. So try that. You can even try it right now. You don't have to be like doing the big blow, right? You can just take a deep breath and breathe out as slowly as you can. This is like a different version of box breathing. It's not inhale, hold it, exhale. It's inhale, slowly exhale. It works wonderfully. And my theory is that it's almost like a placebo effect that amplifies it. The research says that this is what happens. Your brain does say, okay, everything's okay, so it is okay, and therefore your blood chemistry is improved and you're feeling less anxious. But also, now that you know about the research, there's a placebo effect that will hopefully amplify that. I love thinking about that too. So, and then the third thing that I do, usually by then I'm done with my anxiety and I'm moving on to the content. If you're still feeling anxious, or if ever I'm still feeling anxious, the third thing that I often do is I emulate someone's confidence. So I think about someone whose confidence I really, really admire, and I imagine myself kind of embodying them. So what would they do? And the first time I ever did this was when I was a faculty member at the University of Toronto, Rotman School of Management, and I was teaching in the MBA program. I love teaching classes of 80 students or so, and they asked me to go into a huge auditorium, convocation hall, and do this first year massive lecture with convocation hall seats 1,400 students. And I know that it was probably half full. So there were, I don't know, at least 500 students there. And I remember when I walked out on stage, I thought I was fine. And then I looked out, I was like, oh my goodness, this is a big deal. And I felt this adrenaline. And I was like, Andrea, adrenaline's a good thing. Positive energy, slow your exhale. Still, I was feeling the anxiety. So then I said, you know what? I'm a rock star. I'm going to imagine that I am Madonna. And I emulated Madonna. So I'm not saying be Madonna. I'm saying be whoever whoever's confidence you admire. Yes, I'm dating myself. Tom, I saw you laughing at me there. Tom and I are exactly the same age, I think. Anyway, so think of someone. It could be a rock star. So I had a conversation with Dave Jackson, who hosts the School of Podcasting, a podcast. He interviewed me for the podcast, and we had this conversation about what we do when we're nervous. And he said that he imagines that he's David Lee Roth before he goes up on stage to do a keynote. So this is a common thing. And I have another level for you for this one. It's not just someone else's confidence that you admire. You may recall an event when you knocked it out of the park, and just remind yourself of when that was, how you were feeling, what you were doing, and then emulate yourself. So back to my story of being on stage at Convocation Hall. When I was done that, whatever it was, 75-minute lecture, I was on a stage, right? And I felt like I was getting rushed by the students. Everybody was raising their hand. What are your office hours? Where's your office? What course are you teaching next semester? I want to be in your class, professor, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, I really am I'm a rock star professor now, right? So it went really, really well. And so now when I'm feeling nervous, I'm like, if I can do that, a bunch of 21-year-old hypercritical students, I managed to capture their attention. So I figure I can do it anywhere. So is there someone else's whose confidence you admire? Focus on them, or focus on your own experience when you know that you knocked it out of the park. Does anyone else have any suggestions or questions about boosting your confidence? Yes, I see a hand up.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you for nice to meet you, and thank you for
Nice to meet you too, Jared.
Yeah, I appreciate all the insights. So I've felt imposter syndrome sometimes. I'm an HR leader too.
Okay.
And like if I'm managing a large team and I'm feeling really overwhelmed and my boss is coming down on me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't want them to see it on my face. And I feel like they are seeing it on my face, or me rushing around. How do you change that narrative in your head?
So do you mean that just they're watching you kind of day to day, or or you're in a meeting where you're having a conversation with them? Is it during
No, so like I just left my last job and I'm about to start something new. Now, the last job I had 13 very strong personalities of the opposite gender.
Okay.
I'm trying to say it tactfully and PC. And so they would be like, even if I wore like a bracelet or something or anything, they would be like, boom, they would see that. They're highly uber sensitive, strong, a lot of A-type personalities. That happens with people that you're managing at times. My question is that, like, if you are in a senior leadership position, you're feeling overwhelmed at work, and the imposter syndrome seeps in saying, do I really deserve to be in this position? Am I really up to the task of doing this? And then you doubt yourself. And then as you perceive yourself, others perceive you that way. How can you change that narrative in your...
Yeah. Jared, you're reminding me, yesterday I was working on a presentation that I'm doing on Thursday night. And part of what I'm talking about is confidence. And I talk in this one part of the presentation about the difference between confidence and gravitas. Of course, it depends on how you define it, right? But I was encouraging the audience to think of confidence as how you feel internally, and gravitas is like how it's perceived externally. So your question is both, I think, right? So how do I feel more confident and be perceived by them as more confident, right?
Correct.
So one of the things that I've learned, I would say I've become a huge proponent of this, Jared, especially in the last year or so. If people listen to my podcast, they probably have perceived this. I'm a huge fan of creating a narrative that provides you with focus that you will reinforce. And this is really part of your professional identity, right? But creating a narrative around that thing. So often our liabilities are something that really limit our self-perceived liabilities, right? Are things that limit our ascension up the corporate ladder. And my suggestion for most people in most contexts is to take that perceived liability and turn it into an asset by creating a narrative around it. And so I know there's some people in this audience here who are fantastic storytellers. So the phrase that I like to use is there's a million ways of telling a story. So make sure you tell your story, Jared, in a way that serves you. So you're saying, I'm feeling imposter syndrome and should I really be here? Is there a way of shifting that kind of liability thinking to be more of a positive? So maybe you are not a hierarchical authoritarian leader. And maybe that's what you say. I might be the vice president, but I really very comfortable and skilled at getting the best out of everybody and having a collaborative team. So let's
Yes.
just, right? So you see where I'm headed here? And then
Yes.
suddenly people will be, if you say it over and over again, and over time, the narrative, I was going to say can evolve. It actually should evolve over time because the world changes, the company changes, you mature, hopefully you get promoted, right? So you could say I'm a great team collaborator, and then that becomes over time I'm a team leader. And I'm just making this up because I don't know exactly the scenario, Jared, but I guess my main suggestion is to you, think about what the liability is and see if there's a way of doing a 180 on it. So you are taking control of that thing and turning it into a positive. Instead of letting them think he seems nervous, you could say something like, sometimes I'm a man of few words. I'm a great listener and I really want to hear what other people say, right? So instead of letting them think he's nervous, you're telling them what's going on.
Got it.
Does that help?
No, it does help. I was thinking about like how you say things in your head. Like you said, great team collaborator. I've said to my team and to other people, or my team and sometimes to like peers and stuff, I lead by consensus.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So beautiful, but a little bit jargony. So my suggestion in terms of making it really part of your personal narrative, Jared, is that you could say, I lead by consensus, let it land, pause. What I mean by that is, right? So this is what I was talking about before. You know what your 2 or 3 real strengths are. You name it, you define it, and then you have stories. So obviously you're not in a job interview when you're talking to your staff, but you can say, if someone calls into question or whatever the context is, you name it and then you define it, and then if necessary or if appropriate, you could share stories. Remember the time that I did this and this and this? That's when I realized this is my unique style of leadership. And by the way, talking about your style of leadership is a wonderful opportunity to share your unique professional identity, right? Just the term. There's a couple prompts I want to share. So one is your leadership style. I think I've noticed that a lot of the folks that I talk to, they haven't, when I ask them, so what's your functional expertise? What's your industry expertise, right? What's your sector expertise? And then I'll say, what about your leadership style? And then they go, I'm a good leader. I'm a good people leader, right? So putting some words around that you really hammer home that are truly authentic to you will help you a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. Marcel?
So this is sort of loosely or remotely, no pun intended, remotely related to confidence. And the scenario is this. So I'm in job search and I've had remote interviews or via Zoom. And my challenge was that as I'm speaking, I'm trying to look at the camera and not at the screen. In this particular case, it was a panel of 3, so myself included 4. So you have these 4 little boxes on the screen.
Yep.
Long story short, I had no visual contact. In other words, I didn't see facial expressions. I didn't see any kind of reactions to the responses that I gave, the stories that I gave, etc. And it impacted my confidence. It impacted how I was thinking in my head while I was responding, to the point where I started to say after almost every response, I said, is that what you were looking for? Right?
Okay.
Am I missing something in the response? Do you like to hear more? Right? So it was, and it was because, again, I wasn't sure, I didn't see heads nodding. I didn't see anything like that, right? Any thoughts around
Yep.
that. I know it's
Yep.
maybe a little bit more technical around.
Yeah, I've
you
got
know,
thoughts, Marcel. So the first thing I want to say is kind of obvious, I hope, but I just want to remind you that, you know, what I'm looking at the green light on my laptop right now, and it is not natural, but I know that we are wired to trust and like people who look us in the eye. And even though we all know that I'm not looking you in the eye, I'm looking at the camera, your brain is still perceiving that I am looking you in the eye. So just know that. Just know in your mind that you are, it's almost like we all know that crossing your arms makes us look defensive and we're not open and people won't trust us more. There's tons of research on that, right? But it's comfortable. Like crossing your arms is just comfortable, but we know not to do it. So just don't. And it's the same thing just in terms of, you know, you're going into a remote interview, a virtual interview. You are not going to see their body language. You'll be lucky if you see their facial expression. Just know that going in. So tell yourself, this is the context that I'm in, and just remind yourself of it. And then it won't feel maybe quite as awkward as it does otherwise. And then also remember that they are experiencing the same thing. So what I tell people, I have two hacks for this. First of all, I want to just remind you that it is definitely okay, like I am right now, to look around the screen so that you can get some feedback in terms of facial expressions and body language from other people. And you all know, like I'm looking down at Eric and Diane and Stephen, and I see you, right? And you know that I'm not like, you know, talking to someone else over here in my family or something, right? So we all know that. It's okay. In fact, it's a good idea for you to look at facial expressions and body language. However, when you're making your most important point, do look at the camera. And so if they ask you in your job interview, Marcel, what are your strengths as an HR leader? That's when you go right to the camera and you say, I have two strengths, this and this. I'm going to define them and I'm going to share examples with you. And you are looking right at the camera. Okay. So when you're making your most important points, that's one thing. The other thing is, if somebody else is talking, I do this all the time. You see me move my hands up here. What I'm doing is I'm moving around the Zoom screen and I'm putting the speaker right underneath my camera, so that when I'm looking at the speaker, I look like I'm looking at the camera. It's like a hack that just makes it easier. And then you don't have to look at the camera. You can look at the speaker. Right now, Jared is right underneath my camera, so I'm looking at him more than anybody else. So I hope that helps. And the last thing I wanted to say, Marcel, is your question of, is that what you were looking for? I would definitely rephrase that. Let me tell you why. Interviewers are very used to people trying to guess what the right answer is, when actually they want to get to know you. So by saying, is that what you were looking for? It sounds as if you're trying to guess what they think the right answer is, as opposed to, have I sufficiently answered the question? So I understand, Marcel, that what you were trying to say is, I'm happy to elaborate. So why don't you say that, yes, this is what I think. I'm happy to elaborate, and then pause. And then you're not being, so this is the other balance in interviews. You don't want to babble and go on and on with an unstructured answer. You also don't want to seem evasive. So my suggestion is that you answer your questions, you know, using the power of three. Let me tell you three reasons, or let me tell you three skills, or blah, blah. Use structure in your answer. And then when you're done, say, I'm happy to elaborate. Or you could say, am I clear? Do you have any questions, other questions about this, right? So you're basically emphasizing that you're done, but you're not being evasive, as opposed to, is that what you were looking for? I think that's probably not serving you. It sounds, again, like you're trying to please them. And I know from coaching a few folks in job interviews who, through my coaching, I helped them transform from trying to answer the questions correctly to answering the questions in a way that it was true to their professional identity and their skills and their I guess their goals in terms of their career. If you're true to those things, then your confidence is going to soar, and you're more likable. So hope that helps.
Thank you.
You're
Yeah.
welcome. You're welcome. I know. I was just thinking that Suzanne said it's hard when you're in HR to have to interview with HR.
It's
Yeah.
so true.
Yeah, and Steven said the poker face interviews challenge you to embrace your case for the job. My son just had an interview, one of his first interviews, and he said um, one of the guys that was interviewing him was like really, really friendly. He was like the dude, the bro, and the other one was really kind of mean to him. I was like, oh, they're playing the good cop, bad cop. That's completely normal. Just keep smiling and pretend they're both your friends and whatever. It's fascinating. I've got several other questions here. We've got 15 minutes, so should I just keep going? Okay. So this is a common question that I got from somebody on LinkedIn when I was sending out the reminder. And so I thought I would just answer because this question I get all the time. It's how can I promote my brand without sounding arrogant? So I'm paraphrasing the question. How can I talk about my strengths? How can I, for those of you who know me, I'm a big proponent of having a structured self-introduction that's not scripted, right? But you're following the present, past, future framework, and you're filling it in with your unique superpowers, reminding people about your expertise, your leadership style, and so on and so on. But a lot of folks, even after we've done the deep work of identifying what their 3, 5, 7, 10 personal branding themes are, and then we start practicing how to introduce yourself, how to talk to yourself in certain contexts, they say, it just sounds so weird for me to say, what differentiates me compared to other HR leaders is my ability to blah, 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 right? And I say, okay, so I do have a few hacks. The first one is what I call the 3 magic words. The 3 magic words, I'm going to type them in here. People tell me. So chances are, if you've done the work in your personal brand, which is one of the exercises that I take my clients through when I'm doing coaching or one-on-one coaching or in the boot camp, is you actually send emails out to people and you ask them, there's specific questions. I make it very easy for the folks to get this, for you to get the answers and also for the other people to provide the answers. So there's 3 quick questions that you send them. But then you get back this mountain, because you've sent the email to several people, of evidence of what your strengths are. And this is coming from other people. So you can legitimately say, people tell me that what differentiates me, blah, blah, blah. And it makes you feel more confident. And also it's highly credible because it's like a third person testimonial. You're not saying the thing about me that you really need to know is my key strength. No. You're saying people tell me. So I say this when I'm, for example, meeting with an HR department who's thinking about hiring me to do workshops or coaching in their organization. And I will say, even if they don't ask, I will say, people tell me, my clients tell me that one thing that differentiates me compared to other executive coaches is my enthusiasm and my energy. I keep audiences engaged. When I'm on stage, I promise you, I will keep the audience engaged. I will get them talking. I will get them thinking, and it will make an impact, right? People tell me, so you can be specific. My clients tell me, my staff tell me, the people that have reported to me have told me that I am the most, right? So put your strength in other people's words. So again, it could be from the pre-work that you've done for the boot camp or the coaching with me. It could be literally from conversations that you've had with people. It could be even from evaluations, your formal evaluation that you get at work. Usually they do share some positive things that you're doing, right? So you could say, in my evaluation, let me tell you the strength that always comes up. That's another way of saying people tell me. And that's a fantastic way of promoting yourself without sounding arrogant. I've got a few here. That's why I'm looking down at my list. So there's also, calling the elephant out in the room. This is like being very specific. I say, just say it and be explicit. You could say something like, I don't want to sound arrogant. I don't really talk about my strengths a lot, but since you asked, let me tell you what it is. Just be completely direct and explicit. Like, name how you're feeling. It makes me feel awkward talking about myself this way, but if I had to choose a skill or a talent or a strength, it would be whatever, right? So calling it out, just saying it, being explicit, being direct. That's the second one. And then the third one, I think this one is quite magical. They all are. It depends on the context, but these can all work. The third one is to remind yourself that you're not good at everything. So if you've done the work, I'm guessing all of you have done some of this thinking, at least if you've not done the work in terms of identifying what your unique strengths are, you're already in a mindset of knowing that you're not good at everything. So arrogant people are defensive. No one in the room can be better than them at anything. No one in the room can teach them anything. That is not you. You are focused on your unique superpowers. Okay? So you are not saying that you're good at everything. It's like you have a growth mindset, you're constantly learning and you've done the thinking and you know. So you can, like when you say, this is the other prompt that I love teaching is compared to other. So compared to other executive communication coaches, I am. Compared to other copywriters, I am. Compared to other HR leaders, whatever. And chances are you know what that thing is. So you can say it, but you're not saying that you're good at everything. And you could even say, if you're still feeling sheepish, you could say, listen, I know I've got a lot to learn, but I'll tell you what I am really good at, right? So again, being explicit. Any questions about that or other suggestions about how to talk about your strengths without sounding arrogant? I did see a few people madly taking notes. That's always a good sign. As I was looking at the screen, I saw people doing this. I assume you're not on your phone doing social media. I've got another one that's personal branding related. I feel like a lot of my coaching, and I have to tell you, as an executive communication coach, I truly had no idea. It didn't cross my mind that at this point, I've been doing the podcast now for 6 years. Over 50% of my coaching and my workshops now is focused on helping people identify their unique superpowers, articulate their personal brand and their professional identity. So I have a message here from Stephen. My role at work has gone from being management to principal individual contributor. What can you recommend I adjust in my professional brand to this new role while remaining true to my goal to reach a C-level role in the future? Okay, Stephen, how are you? Good. Stephen is a past boot camp member and fantastic contributor. So I have to, and he has here to principal individual contributor. These are his words. And he has the goal of reaching a C-level role in the future. So here's where what I said before about your creating your narrative around your career is really critical. Okay. So talking about where you are right now, Stephen, in a way that makes it really clear that what you're doing now is valuable, what you did before was valuable, and you have your eye on the prize. So you could say things like, in my current role, blah, 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 I am able to do this. And just by saying the word current, it sounds like, oh, he's thinking about what's next. Do you see what I mean by that?
I do.
Yeah. I've noticed a lot of people when they're introducing themselves, and yes, I coach a lot of people to introduce themselves. I noticed that especially junior people, they'll say, I went to this college, I studied this, and then they'll say, currently I'm whatever. And I'm thinking in my mind, they talk that way because they're thinking about the future. Like, currently I'm doing this. Just wait till you see what's next. So Stephen, I would say use the word currently. I would also talk about the past. And there's a beautiful phrase that you can play with a little bit, but it's based on some academic research that I read about women who were exceptionally successful at ascending the corporate ladder. And they use the term in my path to leadership. So in this academic research, they interviewed, 50, I'm making up the number, 50 women about what differentiated them. And then they created all these categories of things that they did that was different from other people and different from the women that were less successful. And one thing that they all did was they talked about their history in terms of their career, not just a chronology, like first I did this, then I did this, then I did this. Rather, they said, in my path to leadership, I started here, where I learned this. And then I learned this skill. And then, of course, I needed to go international. So I did this. And so they talk about it retroactively in a way that makes sense. So you're like, of course, they're going to be CEO. So, Stephen, I hope that you will talk about what you do. So when you're introducing yourself, you got the present, you currently, I am doing this, like hinting that you're in it for the long game and the C-suite, and then talk about your past and say, in my path to this leadership position, blah, 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 or in my path to leadership, and then talk about, don't just mention the things that you've done in the past, highlight how they are setting you up for the top job.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We've got, here's a question from Eric. We've got 4 minutes left, so I think we'll make this the last question. I have a long-term style of being a consensus builder. People tell me, beautiful Eric, that sometimes I need to be much more directive when we're talking too long to reach consensus or cannot get there. Any suggestions about communicating out of character when needed? So I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but I think this is, again, about creating a narrative. You can say, in my leadership role, I'm known as a consensus builder. And you could say in the moment, in experiences like this, where there are diverging opinions that can't seem to come together, I'll tell you, I've learned how to deal with it. So here's what we're going to do, right? So you're actually narrating what's going on. You're articulating and reinforcing what your professional identity is, what your leadership style is. And then you're telling them, I've learned this, even though I'm this consensus builder, which has some negatives and maybe you're perceiving it has some positives. I know how to overcome it. Here's what I've learned and here's what we're going to do. So you're being decisive and you're being an effective leader. I realize that may be oversimplifying it, but I would take it as an opportunity to reinforce what your strength is and then also to reinforce your growth mindset and your capability to lead in the moment. I hope that helps, Eric. Can I get a thumbs up or anything?
Yes, sorry about that.
That's okay. That's okay.
On my phone, and I've got to switch from screen to screen. Yeah,
Oh,
no, that's actually quite helpful. I'm not looking at a new position here. This is really with my own team, which are generally pretty senior people.
Yeah.
That's a helpful thought.
So I guess as a sort of a meta summary here, I feel like my focus on creating and controlling a narrative around your professional identity is really key. And I want you to think about, like all of you are here because you are lifelong learners and you have a growth mindset. I want you to think about very carefully about what your strengths are. And when you feel, that liability or that context where things are not quite in your wheelhouse, you could say, or in your area of strength or your superpower, figure out a way of reinforcing what your strength is and then demonstrating that you are learning and growing. And so all the while, you are consistently reinforcing your brand. And we've only got 1 minute left. So if any of you are interested in joining me in the month of, can you believe April's almost over? In the month of May, starting next week, I do have a personal branding boot camp coming out. And thank you, Priscilla. The live coaching in that boot camp is every Wednesday at noon, the 7th, the 14th, the 21st, and the 28th. If you can't attend any of them, they are recorded, but we have all sorts of other things that we do. We have a Slack group, and I'm in the Slack group, so we're supporting each other, answering questions. And in this boot camp, we do talk about creating your narrative, how to introduce yourself with confidence. Each person will leave the boot camp with a personal branding template with, I used to say between 12 and 15, but someone did it recently with 10 and it was A+. So I say between 10 and 15 themes that are positive, unique, and relevant to you. So these are your personal branding themes that you end up using in your conversations with difficult people, when you're leading and you're feeling imposter syndrome, when you're introducing yourself, when you're in job interviews. So I would love to see you there. If you have any questions, you can DM me anytime on LinkedIn, and I'm going to post this recording on LinkedIn. And so if you have any questions, you can also ask them on that post. Thank you so much for your amazing questions, and it was great to see you. Talk soon.
Thanks.